Yeah, I think that's fantastic. So I'm going to maybe attempt to summarise what was a really interesting conversation, and just to give you an idea of numbers. There's about 12, 15 of us, so you know that was a good set to get some opinions, but clearly may or may not be representative of hundreds here. Our conversation was exclusively about retail. Didn't really touch too much upon employment or the economic position of Richmond. First off, I would say when it came to retail, we acknowledged that it wasn't just Richmond, but I think nationally, retail's in a fair bit of distress. We all know through COVID, but there was probably a slow demise prior to COVID, and maybe to a degree we're all in part of a bit to blame here, in that we would love a really vibrant high street, but at the same time we buy a lot of things off Amazon, which is doing the exact opposite. Fair to say our opinion and views of landlords wasn't very high. We felt they were perhaps a major part of the problem. Okay, so let me just touch upon a couple of potential solutions we thought of. We really were encouraged by the big brands of the Scots of Mayfair, of Ottolenghi, wasn't it, coming in and sort of applauded the council for playing a part in doing that, attracting those big businesses. We felt also not only could the council do just a little bit more to really champion Richmond with the high quality rental owners, to encourage them to come to Richmond. Richmond's a wonderful place, but of course we're in competition with lots of other places. The other thing which we felt was really important was employment here. The retail high street relies so much upon workers, and the workers have also dropped in the last 5 years or so. If the more companies that can return to Richmond, that would only improve matters. We did recognise that we're perhaps stuck in the middle. We're stuck in the middle of the big Kingstons that have the large shops and offer a lot more than perhaps Richmond can. But we're stuck in the middle because we're also not like a Barnes. Could we do more in terms of the size of the retail units? It's quite a big decision to invest in Richmond when the units are so large. Could we do something that could make the units smaller, which would make the high street more of a boutique offering? And we feel it's the boutique offering that we will miss, and it's the boutique offering that perhaps would bring more people to the high street. I think one final comment in my 5 minutes is about the nighttime piece. Recognise that there's more to Richmond than simply all those who live here, than simply the 8 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon. So we want a vibrant place. We want this to have employment. We want the youth of today to enjoy themselves, but crikey, we're also partly concerned that we live here too. So how do we strike that balance? Got some sympathy with the council there, because the residents want maybe depending on the bun here, and as a resident, I probably want a quiet nightlife, not a very vibrant one, but maybe in March. Okay, happy to take questions or corrections from my table if I can say that.
Thanks, Ian. Right. Table 1.
Our table, just if you don't know, was transport, accessibility, connectivity, and public space. And a lot of time was spent on the transport side of it. But I'm going to kick off with the connectivity, which generally speaking, people said was pretty good. The services on trains, the services on buses is actually quite good. So Richmond is well connected. That helps to bring people in to the area from around London. The other point to that is how good is connectivity around the area, within the area. And again, I think people felt that was not too bad. Then we got into a lot of discussion about pedestrianisation. Now, the point was made that we're not actually talking about pedestrianisation of George Street, but that it's more a case of what can we do to reduce the traffic that runs through George Street. And with that in mind, the point that was made over it was how do we reduce the traffic? So how do we reduce the desire of people to drive? How do we encourage people to leave the car at home? And the conversation went along the lines of can we do more in terms of park and ride? So are we doing enough in that? That's a question. And then that developed into park and walk. Really, we should be looking at getting people to walk that final mile into town if they can. And that then raises the question of if you can't walk, if you are unable to drive, what are your alternatives to get into the town? And that's obviously is an important consideration. Inequality came up. I mean, George Street is one of the worst places, or was one of the worst places for air quality due to pollution. A large part of that was the buses that chugged through and stopped, and that obviously has changed with time. There are electric buses generally now going through. There's still a couple that are diesel furnaces. So generally speaking, the air quality in George Street is improving anyway. Another comment, which will probably resonate with a few people, is cycling on pavements and a concern about that. And there is a general feeling that it's become more dangerous because people are using electric bikes and cycling on pavements or scooters, and that there's a heavier, they go faster, and therefore the impact, so to speak, is much greater. The final thing, which I thought was quite interesting, was something that's been looked at by the council many years ago, is what can we do to enhance the square? Now, if you don't know where the square is, that's the junction of Quadrant George Street to Duke Street. And it's kind of a difficult place to cross the road if you wanted to do that. The buses and vehicles sweep round, go up into Eaton Street. It's a blind corner. It's not a great place, and so our view would be council look at that, make that a priority, enhance the town centre, and see what you can do with that. One suggestion would possibly close off Duke Street with a view to making less traffic going around that area. And I think that's kind of it. Unless anybody else wants to add anything.
Yeah, in relation to cycling on the pavement, it was pointed out that one way to reduce that is to make cycling safer on the road. The obvious way to do that is simply to reduce the amount of motor traffic passing through Richmond.
So you didn't hear that. That was basically to stop people cycling on the pavement, make the roads safer, and reduce the traffic that goes through town. Which actually then opens up the other point was, well, should we be doing more in the way of enforcement? And there is an issue in terms of the police and people who have to enforce that, and they're not necessarily around to see it. So there we are.
Thank you, Stephen. Well, one might as well continue in a logical fashion. So, table 3. Thank you. Becky. Well, you should thank Becky very much because she's from the Thames Strategy, and she did like a evening. She knows what she's talking about. Jason, both of them, and it's good to do so. And they know what they're talking about. So, thank you. It's quite an introduction. One of the main things that we were also talking about and came across, we were talking about roadside heritage assets within the town centre. One of the things that was highlighted was the fact that there is already an 80% positive tick against our green and public open spaces, which is, for anybody else that's ever done those big scale statistics, 80% is huge. And so there's always the concern that you lower the offer by trying to make it better. So one of the things, a lot of the discussion was about, this is all really, really good. Maybe we can make it slightly better, looking at tweaks to things rather than full-scale implementations. Some of the suggestions were that there's already loads of great pubs and restaurants and formal seating and dining opportunities on the riverside. Perhaps there would be some more opportunities for something a bit more informal. So rather than just the ice cream van, maybe a coffee cart or something, so that you can get something on the go without having to go into town to go to a cafe to get your cup of coffee and a sandwich and then sit down on the river. Maybe opportunities. There are some cafes, maybe looking at ways that can be moved around. We did a little bit of a crossover in terms of the nighttime stuff and the lighting stuff and the riverside, talking about things in terms of consideration of safety. On the river, obviously, you don't want people to not be able to see where they're going and they fall in because it's dark and it's not lit. But you don't want too much lighting because that impacts on the fact that it's a major bat and other nocturnal wildlife location. But it could potentially be used for things like wayfinding. So specific colours of soft lighting could potentially be used. You follow blue lights from the station to the river. You follow green lights from the station to the green. But very soft, gentle lighting, things of romantic sort of historical sort of style, gas lampy sort of atmosphere would be much more in keeping with Richmond's character than neon lights that are much more bright. So soft, subtle, and appropriate. So I use the example to demonstrate the handrail lighting that goes underneath Richmond Bridge. So you don't have floor lighting because it goes underwater all the time. You don't have lighting from above because it's quite intrusive. It's very subtle, just little lights underneath the handrail that guide you underneath the bridge. So sort of some of those subtle elements might be useful within it. It also, there's a risk of lighting impacting on heritage because it has in the past been noted that lighting strategies include things like uplighting on trees or lighting feature buildings, which could potentially be damaging to the wildlife or the heritage, but again, have the opportunity to improve. So basically, we didn't have an answer, we just threw a lot of suggestions at the board to see what would stick. One of the other suggestions was, which we don't know whether the council would even be able to do anything about, but one of the sites that was noted along the riverside as being limited in terms of its friendliness, for want of a better word, is Heron Court. But of course, that's privately managed and it's got private keep out everywhere, even though it is a publicly accessible space. Maybe the council could consider some negotiation of improving that space with the landowners. In terms of wildlife and diversity, one of the things that was asked about was water quality and what is the water quality like. We did reply that it is still getting better, no matter what the newspapers say. Overall, water quality is getting better. The problem we have is the increased risk from the discharges, the sudden spillages. But also tied to that is things like looking at potential fish refuges for the impact of climate change that's happening. It's a very valuable smelt nursery in Richmond. Quite, nationally important nursery for that species of fish. So making sure that there's some form of activity for them. So talking about doing things for young people, baby fish, I don't think we're quite doing it. The other thing was if we were increasing the popularity and the use of the space, you run the risk of increased litter. But it was recognised that Richmond and its contractors and its relationships with the business community have already done a huge amount in terms of reducing litter, things like recyclable or reusable or biodegradable plastic cups, paper cups, and so on. So the thing was basically, if you are going to do more, make sure that those policies continue and are expanded upon in keeping with any expansion. There were a couple of queries about some of the work that has been done already by the council, things like the boardwalk on Old Deer Park was considered to be very good, but the connecting paths, because of the changes that have happened, partly because of the installations of the path, but also through climate change and things getting wetter, looking more detailed at the engineering and getting more of that hydrological design, particularly when some of the park recommendations have been for that kind of space, need to make sure that they're more in keeping and they're more researched and technical. There was an overall no to things like floating assets within the river, from saunas and swimming pools and things. More to the original question that we were asked when we started this was, is it even physically possible? Against then, how do you do it? The resounding suggestion was, no, it's not physically possible. Don't waste time on thinking about it. In terms of things like activity on the riverside, so skate parks, gyms, those kinds of things, also not necessarily appropriate either because of the impact on the heritage and the character, but also the potential impact from if they're underwater because it's a high tide, exactly great. And similarly to previous comments, powered bikes were considered a huge negative, particularly the conflict between cyclists and pedestrians on the riverside. We do want cyclists to be out and enjoying spaces, but we need to find appropriate locations. Where is the riverside wide enough? Where is it appropriate for those things? And taking into account the additional risks from things like the big heavy powered bikes, if they fall in the river with you on it, doesn't end well. Get electrocuted for a start with a big battery that's on it. And the final thing the two other final things we discussed was the climate change impacts, which we kind of cover everything when it comes to the riverside, submerging during tides and changing of tideways, but also potential heritage impacts of things like having the buses go around heritage assets like the green, that may or may not be appropriate in terms of its heritage status, and just thinking about how that character and the heritage is fixed in with it. And that's all the key points. Are they against anything? Yeah. Thank you. Right, table 4.
Thank you. We had the benefit of having Councillor Geezer on that table, who was very forthcoming in several things. And interestingly, the nighttime economy, we seem really want to concentrate on the young members of our society. And came to not a conclusion, but a strong suggestion that we should actually utilise and follow up what we've got in the form of, we have a large number of areas which we could probably use better, like this place for a start. If you want musical events and such like, it must be possible to extend the live people come work and listen here. We also talked about replicating or taking advice from things like the Ted Lasso effect, following maybe a music trail of such like for maybe young people and old people alike. We had a very interesting gentleman, I'm afraid I've forgotten his name, who talked a lot about the events that happened in prison in Kingston, and night, the facility there. And we felt that we could actually learn a lot of what we've already got in that respect. We've got a list here of the spaces which we could be used to prove the nighttime events in Richmond. I mean, the library, Richmond Theatre, the Orange Tree Theatre, Paul's Park, Museum, George Street, which we used last week. St Mary's Church, which is right in the middle of Richmond, and the Town Hall. The Town Hall doesn't seem to function much at all, as far as I can see, and I've been here for some years. And we also mentioned Heron's, I think it was Heron Square, that was the one that seems to be blocked out ever since it was built. Although I do know that they did try to get that area opened up to the public from the very beginning, but it was fought against it, and it's never been opened since. And Whitaker Avenue. Maybe night markets or evening markets, less emphasis on licensed premises and opening, not till late at night, but just a bit later to bring people into the town and then go on from there. And that's about it. I think that I've left anything out. Yeah, thank you very much indeed.
Right, 35. Please.
I need a microphone. Thank you. Okay. Shall I do it from here? Okay, that's right.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay, right, thank you. So firstly, on the arts and culture, there was a lot of, one point firstly on the arts and culture, I think, yeah, is that the museum, which I must say benefited hugely from the centre stage and visitors, that it does need a better home than being stuck in the attic of the old town hall. So that was a real priority. The other, the other thing is that I think it was still one of the presentations, mentioned rock school in Twickenham, and that because Richmond has such an association with music, the possibility, obviously very long term, of something, a school or college of excellence for music in Richmond. Obviously that's, as I say, that's long term, but it's something that should be considered. Also communication about arts events, and we specifically mentioned summarise, again on the centre stage, they had more people, they have a concert on the lunchtime concert on Saturdays. People don't really know about that, but they have far more visitors. And so summarise again is another place for excellence for music. So then, just I think I'll keep on it now, sort of on activities as well for young people. A skateboarding area somewhere. I think that's I think the whole thing is somewhere around Old Deer Park. We might have problems with the Crown Estate, I don't know, but it's certainly something that should be considered. And also playing facilities in Richmond generally, because of the playground and walkway, and that's pretty well it. The festival, people felt that it was quite difficult to move around George Street. The feedback generally from people with children was that the events for children in George Street were absolutely high quality and great. But closing on George Street for the other events, people didn't really see the point. And that a lot of the activities would have been better placed and done actually on the green or somewhere else. Nice quote from someone I wanted to read. Yes, because we've had some feedback from the festival fed back to us online before this event. This one said, I walked along George Street on my way from the Orange Tree Theatre. Despite the weather, there were still plenty of people enjoying stalls and displays. I thought there was a vibrant atmosphere, family friendly, the real test for local businesses on the day after. And so on that point, we had we had a local business on our table from Payne Court, who in fact had not had a good day. And I also had done some feedback from the businesses on Richmond Hill, who again haven't benefited. So we do need to see how it went in George Street. I know there's been some very positive feedback from businesses on George Street, but I think it's important to find that out before we know whether it's really right to have the events on George Street,
which, does prevent people actually getting into Richmond. Although we have the buses, the diversion of the buses, my suspicions were that they were going around the green reasonably easily, but there was some other observations which said they were actually having, there was some problems of finding the bus or temporary bus stops, and that also they were having difficulty navigating Clarence Street, which I can probably understand. So I think that was, and King Street also businesses suffered because they found the buses going down King Street really did stop people, because it's so narrow, stop people walking down there to the shops. The quality of the stores in George Street, again, people felt they weren't very impressive. And I suppose I can say from my own observation, I felt that really there was a bit too much going on in George Street. But as I say, the activities for children generally were very much appreciated. I think that's it. Did I miss anything? No? Okay.
Last but not least, table 6, might be described as any other business, I suppose. So who's, thank you very much.
Thank you. I think a lot of the topics which were discussed on the free chat table have already been covered by other tables. I think in terms of centre stage, the sentiment was very much as expressed by Pam, and in particular, there were considered to be negative effects on businesses, particularly those in Pave Court. There was business from Pave Court on the table, and they actually shut for the day because of concerns about security issues. And I think the other retail point is that there should be a lot more support for independent businesses who are currently located in Richmond. Again, sort of highlighting the businesses on Richmond Hill and Pave Court. In terms of other topics, there was a big cry out for public toilets to be available in Richmond. There was a sentiment that e-bikes were a nuisance, particularly when they are being ridden by people on pavements without any due regard, particularly for elderly people or families, perhaps mothers with buggies. There was comments about safety in Richmond and the lack of any police presence. There isn't a police station in Richmond anymore. There's a lack of visible policing, and particularly if the council wants to repeat events like centre stage, then sort of safety and policing would need to be addressed. Despite a comment made by someone else, there were comments made on the table about waste in Richmond and the lack of refuge collection and the amount of litter having increased significantly over the past few years. And that is really a roundup of what the free chat had to say.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, well, you'll be pleased to know I'm going to attempt to summarise what the facilitators have said. So you can be released to go and have a drink in a couple of minutes. First of all, I'd like to thank our two councillors who came and spoke. I hope it's been useful for you to at least hear what some members of Richmond Society think. And probably the challenges expressed aren't new. Traffic, disappearance of town centre, they're not new problems. And at least the council is trying to think of ways of dealing with some of these problems. So I think even if we don't necessarily all agree with what what they're proposing or doing, they deserve credit for that. Thank you for applause. Thank you also to the facilitators. It's a jolly difficult job trying to summarise lots of contradictory views, passionately held by people who think they're right. And as I wandered around the tables, everybody was fully engaged in discussion. So I hope for you as members of the audience, the Richmond Society, enjoyed the evening. The next steps for us will be to collate all these post-its, try and produce a sort of coherent report summarising the views that have been expressed, which we will send obviously to members and also to councillors. So that's probably enough about this evening. We haven't quite finished because, and you're right, it. As a little thank you for Phil and Katie, we have a package for each of them.
Oh, well, thank you.
Very much. Very kind.
Last but not least, our next meeting is on Wednesday, October 22nd, and it's the annual awards event. So that's when we hand out big round plaques to projects which we think have made a significant contribution to the amenities of Richmond. And the one after that, that's in Duke Street Church. And the one after that, which is also in Duke Street Church, is on Thursday, the 27th of November, which is Sir David Suchet, aka Poirot. So he's coming to have a chat with us. But we'll post some details to you in due course. So it remains for me to say thank you very much for coming, and that's it.
That's